The helicopter blades churned salt spray off the black waters surrounding Sentinel Island, where 11 expeditions had vanished without a trace over the past 50 years. Marcus Kane pressed his face to the window, studying the jagged cliffs that rose like prison walls from the Pacific. No radio signals, no survivors, no explanations. The pilot's voice crackled through his headset. "Last chance to turn back, Kane. That island's got a taste for blood." Marcus adjusted the pack containing his military-grade equipment, gear that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless private contracts since. But this wasn't about money anymore. The encrypted message had mentioned his missing brother's name, the brother who'd disappeared here 2 years ago on a classified government mission. As the chopper descended toward the only landing zone, a narrow beach flanked by ancient stone monuments, Marcus noticed something the satellite images hadn't shown. Fresh footprints in the sand, recent campfire ash. Someone was still alive on Sentinel Island. But if that was true, why hadn't they tried to leave? What was keeping them here? The skids touched down with a grinding crunch against the volcanic sand. Marcus grabbed his gear and jumped out, immediately crouching low to avoid the rotor wash. The pilot leaned out, shouting over the engine noise. "Radio check every 6 hours. Miss one call and I'm gone for good." Marcus gave a thumbs up, though they both knew the island's electromagnetic anomalies made communication impossible beyond the shoreline. The helicopter lifted off, its sound fading until only the crash of waves and an unsettling silence remained. He straightened, taking his first real look at the place that had consumed his thoughts for 2 years. The beach stretched maybe 200 meters, bookended by those imposing stone structures. They weren't natural formations, too precise, too deliberately placed. Ancient carvings covered their surfaces, worn smooth by centuries of salt air, but still visible in the afternoon light. Marcus pulled out his military-grade GPS unit. The display flickered and died. He tried his satellite phone next. Nothing but static. Just like the reports had warned, the footprints led away from the beach toward a narrow trail that switchbacked up the cliff face. Marcus knelt beside the clearest print. Size 10 boot, military tread pattern, recent enough that the edges hadn't been softened by wind. Whoever made these tracks was still here. He shouldered his pack and started up the trail. Within minutes, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air grew thick, almost viscous, making each breath feel labored despite his excellent physical condition. Strange how the weather reports had mentioned nothing about atmospheric pressure variations. Halfway up the cliff, Marcus paused at a wider section of the trail. Someone had built a small shelter here, branches woven between rocks to form a windbreak. Inside, he found empty MRE packages and a water purification tablet wrapper. Military issue, same type his brother's unit would have carried. A sound echoed from somewhere above, not quite human, not quite animal. It sent an instinctive chill down his spine, the kind of primal warning that had kept his species alive for millennia. Marcus drew his sidearm and continued climbing. The trail emerged onto a plateau covered in dense jungle growth. Ancient ruins poked through the canopy like broken bones, their architecture unlike anything he'd seen in his travels. The stones seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, though that could have been his eyes adjusting to the filtered sunlight. Marcus activated his helmet camera, then remembered the electromagnetic interference would likely corrupt any recording. Still, habit demanded he document what he could. His training kicked in as he moved through the ruins, noting defensive positions and escape routes. That's when he saw it. A modern camp hidden among the ancient stones, military-grade tents, communication equipment, supply caches. But everything looked abandoned, covered in weeks of jungle growth. Personal items scattered, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Marcus approached the largest tent cautiously. The flap hung open, revealing sleeping bags and scattered gear inside. On a makeshift table, he found mission briefings, with portions blacked out, geographical surveys of the island, and most importantly, his brother David's military ID. A photograph was clipped to the inside tent wall. David and his team grinning at the camera, the same ancient monuments visible in the background. 8 men total. The missing government expedition. Behind the photo, Marcus found a handwritten note in David's familiar scrawl. "The island isn't what they told us. The indigenous warnings were right. Something here is alive, ancient, and it doesn't want us to leave. If anyone finds this, don't try to rescue us. Warn them instead. The secret isn't worth—" The note ended abruptly, the pen trailing off mid-sentence. A branch snapped somewhere in the jungle behind him. Marcus spun around, weapon ready, but saw only shadows moving between the massive trees. The feeling of being watched crawled across his skin like insects. Whatever had kept his brother's team here was still present, still hunting, and now it knew Marcus had arrived. The salt air burned Marcus's lungs as he stepped off the charter boat onto the rickety dock at Port Blair. The Andaman Islands stretched before him like forgotten stepping stones in the Bay of Bengal, their jungle-covered peaks shrouded in morning mist. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay his destination, a place marked on no tourist map and spoken of only in hushed warnings. The dockmaster, a weathered Tamil man with suspicious eyes, barely glanced at Marcus's falsified papers. "You sure about this, Sahib? That direction you're heading? Fishermen won't go there. Smart fishermen." Marcus adjusted the weight of his gear bag and checked his watch. "Just need a boat. Nothing fancy." "Fancy won't help you where you're going." The dockmaster spat into the murky water. "But I know someone foolish enough to take your money." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself face to face with Captain Ravi Sharma, a compact man in his 50s, whose hands bore the permanent stains of engine grease and whose eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much ocean. His boat, Thakali's Mercy, had clearly seen better decades. Rust bloomed along her hull like orange flowers, and her diesel engine coughed with mechanical emphysema. "Sentinel Island," Ravi repeated, not as a question but as a pronouncement of doom. The British called it North Sentinel Island. The Sentinelese, they have their own name for it, means place where the sky bleeds. Marcus pulled out a roll of rupees thick enough to choke a water buffalo. "This should cover fuel and your silence." Ravi's eyes widened, but he didn't reach for the money immediately. "You military?" What kind of salvage operation needs a soldier? The kind that pays well enough for you not to ask questions." The captain's weathered fingers finally closed around the cash. "We leave at dawn. I get you close, maybe 2 kilometers offshore. That's it. I don't anchor, I don't wait, and I sure as hell don't come ashore." That night, Marcus sat in a waterfront dive, nursing a whiskey that tasted like industrial solvent and studying satellite images on his encrypted tablet. Sentinel Island appeared as a dark green smudge roughly 8 kilometers long, surrounded by coral reefs that had claimed countless ships over the centuries. The indigenous Sentinelese had maintained their isolation for thousands of years, violently rejecting all contact with the outside world. In 2018, they'd killed a young American missionary with arrows before he'd made it 50 meters inland. But the official reports only told part of the story. Marcus pulled up a restricted file he'd acquired through channels that no longer existed. In 1974, a National Geographic team had attempted to make contact. The expedition leader, Dr. Sarah Chen, had written about strange lights emanating from the island's interior. Lights that didn't match any known bioluminescent phenomena. 3 team members had disappeared during a night reconnaissance. Their bodies were never found, but their equipment washed ashore weeks later, bearing what Chen described as unprecedented electromagnetic damage. The file also contained radar anomalies dating back to World War II. Allied pilots had reported instrument failures when flying over the island, and several Japanese aircraft had simply vanished from radar screens in the area. The British Navy had launched an investigation in 1947, but the report remained classified, with only a single line visible through the redactions: recommend permanent exclusion zone. Nature of threat: undetermined but significant. Marcus closed the files and downed his whiskey. Whatever was on that island, Hartwell's client was paying $20 million to retrieve it. That kind of money suggested something far more valuable than archaeological artifacts or tribal relics. His satellite phone buzzed. Hartwell's voice crackled through the encrypted connection. "Change of plans. You're not going alone." "What do you mean?" "Clients sending their own specialist. Dr. Elena Vasquez, archaeological anthropologist. She'll meet you at the boat." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. This was supposed to be a solo extraction. "I don't babysit civilians." "She's not a civilian. Former Spanish Special Forces, anthropology PhD from Oxford, and according to her file, she's got more experience with indigenous cultures than anyone else willing to take this job. And the real reason she's coming?" Hartwell's pause spoke volumes. "She knows what you're looking for." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. In his experience, mysterious specialists and last-minute plan changes usually meant one of two things. Either the job was more dangerous than advertised, or the client didn't trust him to complete it alone. As he walked back to his hotel through Port Blair's narrow streets, Marcus caught glimpses of the ocean between buildings. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, Sentinel Island waited in the darkness. The locals called it the place where the sky bleeds, but Marcus had seen enough bleeding skies in Afghanistan and Syria to know that the real monsters weren't supernatural. They were always human. The Meridian's engines cut to an idle as they approached the coordinates, leaving only the gentle slap of waves against the hull. Marcus stood at the bow, studying the horizon through salt-stained binoculars. Nothing but endless blue stretched before them, no sign of the research vessel they were meant to salvage. "You sure about these coordinates?" Marcus called back to Chen, who was hunched over the navigation console. "Triple-checked them against the distress beacon data," Chen replied, not looking up from his screen. "This is where the Aurora went dark 3 days ago." Sarah emerged from below deck, her auburn hair whipping in the ocean breeze. She'd changed into a wetsuit, already preparing for the dive. "Could have drifted with the current," she suggested, scanning the water with practiced eyes. "These waters are tricky." Marcus lowered the binoculars, unease settling in his gut. In his experience, when ships vanished without a trace, it usually meant one of two things. Either they'd sunk fast and deep, or someone didn't want them found. Given Voss's secretive nature about this job, he was betting on the latter. "There," Chen pointed southeast. "Sonar's picking up something big, about 2 clicks out." As they approached the contact, Marcus felt the familiar pre-mission tension building in his shoulders. The water here was deeper than he'd expected, nearly 300 feet according to their depth finder. Whatever had happened to the Aurora, it had gone down hard. "Jesus," Sarah breathed, studying the sonar readout. "Look at the size of that debris field." Marcus joined her at the console. The sonar painted a grim picture, twisted metal scattered across the sea floor in a pattern that suggested an explosion rather than an accidental sinking. His military training kicked in automatically, analyzing the wreckage distribution. "This wasn't engine failure," he said quietly. "Something took that ship apart." Chen's face had gone pale. "Maybe we should radio this in to the Coast Guard." "With what radio?" Sarah reminded him. "We're in a dead zone, remember? No satellite coverage for another 100 miles. Marcus studied the sonar image more carefully. Among the debris, one section remained largely intact, what looked like the ship's stern section, including the engine room and storage compartments. If Voss's mysterious cargo had survived, that's where they'd find it. "We stick to the plan," Marcus decided. "Quick dive, grab what we can, get out." As Sarah suited up for the descent, Marcus pulled Chen aside. "I want you monitoring everything up here. Water temperature, current speed, weather patterns. If anything changes, anything at all, you signal us immediately." Chen nodded nervously. "What exactly are you expecting down there?" That was the million-dollar question. Marcus had studied the Aurora's manifest during the journey, but it raised more questions than answers. The ship had been carrying standard research equipment, geological sampling tools, and several sealed containers marked only with alphanumeric codes. Nothing that screamed valuable enough to justify Voss's generous payment. "Just keep your eyes open," Marcus said. The dive platform lowered Sarah and Marcus into the blue-black water. As they descended, the sunlight faded quickly, replaced by the artificial glow of their underwater lights. The water was surprisingly clear for these depths, offering good visibility as they approached the wreckage. The Aurora's stern section lay on its side, hull plates peeled back like the petals of a deadly flower. Sarah's voice crackled through the comm system as they swam closer. "Blast pattern suggests internal explosion," she observed. "Something in the cargo hold, maybe." Marcus examined the twisted metal. In his demolitions experience, this looked like a shaped charge, military-grade and precisely placed. This was beginning to feel less like salvage and more like a crime scene. They found an entry point through a gash in the hull and swam into the ship's flooded interior. Emergency lighting still functioned sporadically, casting eerie red shadows through the water-filled corridors. Fish had already begun to claim the vessel, darting away from their intrusion. The cargo hold was a disaster zone. Storage containers lay scattered and broken, their contents dispersed by the explosion and subsequent sinking. But in the far corner, Marcus spotted what they were looking for. 3 intact containers, each about the size of a footlocker, secured behind a reinforced bulkhead that had somehow survived the blast. "Found them," he reported, swimming closer to examine the seals. As Sarah worked to free the containers, Marcus noticed something else: scratch marks along the hull walls, too regular to be random damage. They looked almost like claw marks, but that was impossible at this depth. "Marcus," Sarah's voice held a note of urgency, "you need to see this." She was floating near one of the broken containers, her light illuminating something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Inside the shattered crate, nestled in custom foam padding, were empty restraints. Not shipping restraints, the kind designed to hold something alive. The Aurora hadn't been carrying equipment, it had been carrying specimens. And judging by the bent metal and torn restraints, whatever they'd been transporting had escaped before the ship went down. The Zodiac boat cut through the choppy waters as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the spray-soaked rubber. Behind him, Elena sat rigid, her laptop secured in a waterproof case, while Captain Hendricks chain-smoked cigarettes that the salt wind immediately extinguished. There, Hendricks pointed through the morning haze. "Sentinel Island." Marcus squinted ahead and felt his stomach drop. The island rose from the ocean like a sleeping giant, its jagged cliffs shrouded in unnatural mist that seemed to move against the wind. Dark birds, too large to be gulls, circled the peaks in lazy spirals. Even from 3 miles out, something felt wrong about the place, as if the very air around it carried a warning. "The locals won't even fish these waters," Hendricks muttered, lighting another cigarette. "Say the island calls to things that should stay buried." Elena looked up from her equipment. "Superstition. The magnetic anomalies create unusual atmospheric conditions. That's all." But Marcus noticed she checked her GPS 3 times in the span of a minute. The device flickered erratically, the satellite signal wavering like a dying heartbeat. His own compass spun lazily, unable to find true north. As they approached the island's eastern shore, Marcus spotted the wreckage. The research vessel Meridian lay broken against a reef of black volcanic rock, its white hull split open like a cracked egg. The ship's superstructure was intact, but everything below the waterline had been torn apart by the razor-sharp coral. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. What were they thinking, coming in so close? Hendricks studied the wreck through binoculars. "Ship's been there maybe 6 weeks. Storm damage, most likely. These reefs will gut a hull in minutes if you're not careful." Marcus maneuvered the Zodiac around the reef's edge, searching for a safe approach. The water here was impossibly clear, revealing the skeletal remains of other vessels scattered across the ocean floor, ships from different eras, their bones picked clean by time and tide. A chill ran down his spine as he counted at least a dozen wrecks in the immediate area. "Elena, you getting readings on that equipment of yours?" She frowned at her tablet screen. "Electromagnetic interference is off the charts. And there's something else. Seismic activity. Small tremors but constant, like a heartbeat." The Zodiac bumped against the Meridian's tilted deck. Marcus killed the engine and secured the boat with a magnetic clamp. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the gentle lap of waves and the distant cry of those oversized birds. "Remember," Hendricks said, shouldering his equipment bag, "we're here for the research data and any survivors. Nothing else. In and out, fast as possible." They climbed aboard the wreck through a gap in the port rail. The deck was slick with algae and strewn with debris, charts, equipment cases, and personal effects scattered by wind and weather. Marcus noticed scratch marks in the metal decking, too large and too deep to be explained by the crash. Elena immediately headed for the ship's laboratory while Marcus checked the bridge. The wheelhouse was a maze of broken glass and twisted metal. The captain's log lay open on the chart table, its pages warped by moisture. Marcus flipped through the entries, looking for clues about the crew's final days. The last entry was dated 6 weeks ago, written in an increasingly erratic hand. Day 12. The sounds from the island are getting worse. Davies swears he can hear voices calling from the jungle. Morrison hasn't slept in 3 days. The magnetometer readings don't make sense. It's like there's something massive buried beneath the island's center. Dr. Chen wants to investigate, but I'm pulling us back to safe distance. This place isn't right. A crash from below deck made Marcus jump. He drew his sidearm and moved toward the companionway, stepping carefully over debris. "Elena, you okay down there?" Her voice echoed up from the lab. "Fine. Just knocked over some equipment. Marcus, you need to see this." He found her in the ship's laboratory, standing before a bank of monitoring equipment that somehow still had power. Multiple screens displayed seismic readings, magnetic field measurements, and what looked like sonar imagery of the island's subsurface. "Look at this," Elena pointed to the sonar display. "There's a massive cavity beneath the island. Not natural. The walls are too regular, too geometrically precise. And these magnetic readings..." She shook her head in amazement. "Whatever's down there, it's generating its own electromagnetic field." Marcus studied the data, his military training recognizing patterns that didn't belong in nature. The cavity was enormous, stretching deep into the earth beneath the island's volcanic core. But more disturbing were the smaller chambers branching off like arteries, forming a complex that looked almost organic. "How deep?" he asked. "Nearly 2 miles. But that's not the strangest part." Elena's fingers danced across the keyboard, bringing up a new display. "According to these readings, the structure is over 10,000 years old, and it's still active." The Zodiac boat cut through the pre-dawn darkness, its motor purring quietly as Marcus guided it toward the looming shadow of Sentinel Island. Behind him, Chen worked methodically, checking their equipment one final time. The diving gear, metal detectors, and cutting tools were all secured in waterproof cases, but Marcus noticed the archaeologist's hands trembling slightly as he handled each piece. "Second thoughts?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low despite the empty ocean around them. Chen looked up, his face pale in the green glow of the GPS display. "Dr. Reeves was very specific about the wreck's location, too specific for someone who's never been here." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. The coordinates Reeves provided weren't just accurate. They pinpointed a section of reef that would be impossible to locate without extensive prior survey work. Either Reeves had access to classified naval records, or someone had been to Sentinel Island before and lived to map its treacherous waters. The island's silhouette grew larger, a black mass of jagged peaks against the star-filled sky. According to their charts, They were approaching from the northeast, where a small inlet offered the only viable landing spot within a mile of the wreck site. As they drew closer, Marcus could make out the white foam of waves breaking against the coral reef that surrounded the island like a natural fortress. "There," Chen whispered, pointing toward a gap in the foam line. "Between those two rock formations." Marcus adjusted their heading, feeling the Zodiac respond as they entered calmer water. The inlet was narrow, barely wide enough for their small boat, with coral heads rising dangerously close to the surface on both sides. One miscalculation would tear their hull open and leave them stranded. The beach was a crescent of black volcanic sand, perhaps 50 meters wide, hemmed in by dense jungle that seemed to absorb their boat's running lights. Marcus cut the engine and let momentum carry them onto the sand with a soft grinding sound. The silence that followed was absolute. No bird calls, no insect noise, nothing but the gentle lapping of waves. Chen jumped out and helped pull the Zodiac up the beach. "It's too quiet," he muttered, echoing Marcus's thoughts. They worked quickly to camouflage the boat under palm fronds and driftwood. According to their plan, they would spend no more than 6 hours on the island, locate the wreck, assess the salvage situation, and return to their ship before the afternoon weather patterns turned violent. Simple and clean, assuming everything went according to plan. Marcus slung his gear bag over his shoulder and activated his handheld GPS unit. The wreck lay approximately 300 meters offshore in 25 meters of water. The depth was manageable, but the strong currents that surrounded Sentinel Island would make diving dangerous. They would have one chance to get this right. The jungle pressed close to the beach, a wall of green so thick it seemed impenetrable. Strange vines hung like curtains from towering trees, and the air carried an odd, sweet scent that reminded Marcus of overripe fruit. As they pushed through the vegetation looking for a path to higher ground where they could get a better view of the reef, something crunched under Marcus's boot. He knelt and brushed away the rotting leaves, revealing bleached white fragments. Bones. Human bones by the look of them, those scattered and broken as if by wild animals. Chen crouched beside him, his face grim. "How old do you think they are?" Chen asked. Marcus examined a piece that might have been part of a skull. Hard to say without proper analysis, but they're completely clean. Could be recent, could be decades old. He stood up, scanning the jungle around them. "Either way, we're not the first people to make it ashore." They pushed deeper into the undergrowth, following what might have been an animal trail. The jungle seemed to grow denser with each step, and Marcus found himself constantly checking over his shoulder. The sensation of being watched was so strong it made his skin crawl, but every time he turned around, he saw only shadows and hanging vines. After 10 minutes of climbing through increasingly difficult terrain, they reached a small clearing on a ridge overlooking the reef. Marcus pulled out his binoculars and scanned the water. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the coral formations below. "There," he said, handing the binoculars to Chen. The wreck was exactly where Reeves had said it would be, the broken hull of what appeared to be a military vessel wedged between two massive coral heads. Even from this distance, Marcus could see that the ship was old, probably World War II era, based on its profile. But something about it seemed wrong. The orientation, the way it sat on the reef, suggested it hadn't simply run aground by accident. Chen lowered the binoculars, his expression troubled. "Marcus, that's not a merchant vessel. Look at the gun mounts." Marcus took another look. Chen was right. This was a warship, and whoever had sent them here already knew exactly what they would find. The helicopter's rotors cut through the morning air as Marcus studied the GPS coordinates one final time. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, its surface deceptively calm. Captain Torres sat rigid in the pilot's seat, his weathered hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. "Still time to turn back," Torres muttered over the headset, his voice barely audible above the engine noise. Marcus ignored him, focusing instead on the approaching landmass. Sentinel Island emerged from the haze like a sleeping giant, its jagged coastline shrouded in mist. dense jungle covered most of the island's interior, broken only by rocky outcroppings that jutted skyward like accusatory fingers. Even from this distance, something felt wrong about the place, an oppressive weight that seemed to press against his chest. There, Marcus pointed to a small clearing roughly 2 clicks inland from the northern shore. "Set me down there." Torres shook his head. "That's too close to the interior. The stories say..." "The stories are just that, stories." But even as Marcus spoke the words, he felt doubt gnawing at his resolve. The island seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain, as if the very air itself was alive and watching. As they descended, the jungle canopy revealed its secrets in fragments. Massive trees older than civilization stretched toward the sky, their trunks thick enough to house small buildings. Vines hung like curtains between the branches, creating a natural cathedral of green that filtered the sunlight into an eerie twilight. The helicopter touched down with a soft thud, immediately disturbing a flock of brilliantly colored birds that erupted from the tree line in a cacophony of screeches and beating wings. Marcus shouldered his pack, checking his equipment one last time: GPS tracker, satellite phone, water purification tablets, emergency flares, and his grandfather's compass, a talisman he'd carried through 3 tours in Afghanistan. 48 hours, Torres called, as Marcus stepped onto the spongy jungle floor. "If you're not back at this LZ in 48 hours, I'm gone." Marcus gave him a thumbs up and ducked away from the rotor wash. The helicopter lifted off immediately, its sound fading until only the jungle's natural symphony remained. A complex weaving of insect calls, bird songs, and something else. Something that made the hair on his arms stand up. He pulled out the salvage manifest Dr. Vance had provided. The Meridian had gone down somewhere in the island's central valley, according to the last transmission received before all contact was lost. The crew had been conducting what the manifest vaguely described as geological surveys, but Marcus had learned to read between the lines. Nobody paid premium salvage rates for rock samples. The jungle floor was a carpet of decomposing leaves that gave way beneath his boots with each step. Ancient trees rose around him like pillars in some primordial temple, their canopy so thick that despite the morning hour, he found himself walking in perpetual twilight. The air was heavy with moisture and the rich scent of decay, but underneath it all was something metallic, almost electric. After an hour of hiking, Marcus came across the first sign that the island had been inhabited. Stone markers, weathered smooth by centuries of rain, stood in a rough circle around what might once have been a clearing. Strange symbols were carved into their surfaces, not quite hieroglyphic, not quite pictographic, but somehow familiar in a way that made his skin crawl. He photographed the markers from multiple angles, then checked his GPS, still on course for the Meridian's last known position. As he prepared to move on, a sound stopped him cold, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from the earth itself. It lasted only seconds before fading back into the jungle's ambient noise, but it left Marcus with the unsettling feeling that he was no longer alone. The terrain began to slope downward as he approached the central valley. The vegetation grew thicker, more aggressive, with thorned vines that seemed to deliberately snag his clothing and roots that caught at his ankles. More than once, he had the irrational sensation of being herded, guided along a specific path by forces he couldn't see. The thrumming sound returned, stronger now and definitely coming from somewhere ahead. With it came a new sensation, a tingling in his extremities, as if the air itself was charged with static electricity. His grandfather's compass began behaving erratically, the needle spinning wildly before settling on a bearing that had nothing to do with magnetic north. Then he saw it through a gap in the trees, the Meridian. The research vessel sat upright in a small lake, looking for all the world as if it had sailed there under its own power. But that was impossible. The lake was completely landlocked, surrounded by jungle with no visible water access. More disturbing still, the ship showed no signs of damage, no breached hull, no missing superstructure, nothing to explain why it had simply vanished from all communication 3 months ago. Marcus checked his satellite phone, No signal. The GPS showed his location as an error code. He was completely cut off from the outside world. The humidity hit Marcus like a wall as they approached the island's shore. Through the morning mist, Sentinel Island emerged from the ocean like a sleeping giant, its jungle-covered peaks shrouded in clouds that seemed to cling unnaturally to the landscape. The rocky coastline was jagged and unwelcoming, with waves crashing against black volcanic stone that jutted from the water like broken teeth. There, Reeves pointed to a narrow inlet barely visible between two towering rock formations. "That's our way in. The charts show it's the only safe passage through the reef." Marcus studied the approach through his binoculars. The inlet was so narrow their boat would have mere feet of clearance on either side. Worse, he could see the skeletal remains of at least 3 other vessels scattered on the reef, their rusted hulls serving as grim monuments to failed expeditions. "How many people have tried to reach this place?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with apprehension. "More than have succeeded," Reeves muttered, maneuvering the boat toward the passage. "Government surveys, treasure hunters, scientific expeditions, most turned back. The smart ones, anyway." Marcus noticed Chen had gone unusually quiet, his face pale as he gripped the boat's rail. "You okay, Doc?" "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts," Chen said, checking his equipment with trembling hands. "This level of interference shouldn't be possible from natural sources. It's like the entire island is charged." As they entered the inlet, the temperature dropped noticeably. The walls of volcanic rock rose on either side like a canyon, blocking out most of the sunlight and creating an eerie twilight. Strange patterns were carved into the stone, symbols that looked almost deliberate, though heavily weathered by centuries of salt spray. "Those markings," Sarah said, photographing the walls with her waterproof camera, "they're not natural erosion." Marcus had the same thought. The symbols appeared to follow some kind of sequence, growing more complex as they progressed deeper into the passage. They reminded him of something he'd seen before, though he couldn't place where. The boat's engine suddenly sputtered and died. "What the hell?" Reeves frantically tried to restart it, but the motor remained silent. Their momentum carried them forward, but they were rapidly losing speed. "The electromagnetic field," Chen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's interfering with the electronics." Marcus grabbed the oars from the bottom of the boat. "We'll have to row in the rest of the way." As they paddled through the increasingly narrow passage, Marcus felt an odd sensation, like static electricity building in the air. The hair on his arms stood up, and he noticed the others experiencing the same phenomenon. More disturbing was the silence. No seabirds, no sound of life from the jungle above, just the echo of their oars cutting through the dark water. The passage finally opened into a small lagoon surrounded by dense jungle. A crescent of black sand beach provided the only obvious landing spot, backed by vegetation so thick it looked impenetrable. Massive trees with twisted roots formed a natural barrier, their canopy so dense that the interior of the island remained hidden in shadow. "Jesus," Reeves breathed as they approached the shore. "Look at that!" Half buried in the black sand was the bow of a large vessel, its metal hull corroded and covered in strange growths. But it wasn't the age of the wreck that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was how new it looked compared to what he'd expected. This wasn't some centuries-old shipwreck. The design and construction looked modern, maybe 20 or 30 years old at most. "That's a research vessel," Sarah said, reading the faded lettering on the hull. "The Meridian. Ever heard of it?" Marcus had. The Meridian had disappeared 15 years ago during a government-sponsored expedition to study electromagnetic anomalies in the Pacific. The official report claimed they'd lost contact due to equipment failure, but the ship was never found, until now. They beached their boat beside the wreck, and Marcus immediately noticed something that made his military instincts flare. Scattered on the sand around the ship were personal effects, a waterlogged backpack, pieces of scientific equipment, what looked like the remains of a campsite. But everything was arranged too neatly, almost like a display. "Stay close," Marcus warned, shouldering his pack. "Something's not right here." As they approached the tree line, Chen's equipment began emitting a low, rhythmic beeping. "The electromagnetic signature is strongest inland," he reported. "Whatever's causing this, it's coming from the center of the island." Marcus studied the jungle ahead. There was no obvious path, but as his eyes adjusted to the shadows, he could make out what might have been a trail cutting through the undergrowth. It was barely visible, but it was there, and it led directly toward the heart of Sentinel Island. Behind them, the boat's radio crackled to life momentarily, emitting a burst of static that almost sounded like voices before falling silent again. When Marcus turned back to look, he could have sworn he saw movement in the jungle canopy, but whatever it was had already vanished into the green darkness above. The metallic taste of fear filled Marcus's mouth as he stared at the symbols carved into the obsidian wall. Each marking seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, responding to their presence like living things awakening from ancient slumber. The chamber stretched deeper into the mountain than their flashlight beams could penetrate, and somewhere in that darkness something was waiting. "We should go back," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the strange humming that emanated from the walls themselves. Marcus wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to flee this place and never look back. But the salvage job that had brought him here was worth more than his life, literally. The debts he'd accumulated after his military discharge would destroy him if he returned empty-handed. Whatever lay deeper in this chamber might be his only chance at redemption. 5 more minutes, he said, adjusting his grip on the tactical flashlight. Then we head back to the surface. Dr. Chen moved closer to the wall, her archaeological training overriding her fear. "These symbols, they're not like anything in the historical record. The geometric patterns suggest advanced mathematical understanding, but the style is completely unknown." A low rumble echoed through the chamber, causing loose stones to rain down from the ceiling. Marcus instinctively reached for his sidearm, though he doubted bullets would be much use against whatever forces they'd awakened. "The seismic activity is increasing," Sarah noted, checking her equipment. "Whatever's down here, our presence is definitely triggering something." As if summoned by her words, a section of the far wall began to shift. The obsidian blocks moved with impossible smoothness, revealing a passage that glowed with soft blue-white light. The illumination came from within the stone itself, as though the very walls were charged with energy. Marcus took point, leading the small team deeper into the mountain's heart. The passage sloped downward at a steep angle, and the air grew noticeably warmer with each step. Behind them, the entrance they'd come through sealed itself with the same silent efficiency, trapping them in the luminous tunnel. "No going back now," Marcus muttered, though he tried to keep the observation to himself. The passage opened into a vast underground cathedral. Towering pillars of the same glowing stone supported a ceiling lost in shadows high above. But it was the structure at the chamber's center that stopped them in their tracks. A crystalline formation rose from the floor like a massive tree, its branches reaching toward the unseen ceiling. Within its translucent depths, energy pulsed in rhythmic waves, and Marcus could swear he heard something like a heartbeat echoing through the vast space. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed. "It's beautiful." Sarah's instruments were going crazy, needles dancing across scales as they detected energy readings off the charts. "The electromagnetic signature is unlike anything I've ever seen. This thing is generating power that makes our nuclear plants look like campfires." Marcus approached the crystal formation cautiously. Up close, he could see that the structure wasn't entirely natural. Geometric patterns were embedded within its matrix, and platforms of the same glowing stone provided access to different levels of the crystalline tree. "It's a machine," he realized aloud. Or maybe something between a machine and a living organism. As he spoke, the crystal pulsed brighter, and suddenly the air filled with images. Holographic projections materialized around them, showing scenes that couldn't possibly be real. Vast cities that seemed to float in space. Beings that looked human but possessed an otherworldly grace. Star maps that depicted galaxies Marcus didn't recognize. "It's responding to us," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "It's showing us something." The images shifted, focusing on Earth, but not the Earth they knew. This version was different, more vibrant, more alive. The continents were arranged differently, and structures that dwarfed modern cities dotted the landscape. Then the scene changed, showing the same world in chaos. Fire rained from the sky, oceans boiled, and those magnificent cities crumbled into dust. "A historical record," Dr. Chen whispered. "This is showing us the past." But Marcus wasn't so sure it was just history. The final image lingered longer than the others, a fleet of vessels rising from Earth's surface, carrying the survivors of whatever catastrophe had befallen the planet. And on one of those ships, he glimpsed a symbol that made his blood run cold. It was the same marking they'd found carved into the hull of the wrecked vessel that had brought them here. The implications hit him like a physical blow. The salvage job hadn't been random. Someone had known what was on this island, had sent them here deliberately. They weren't salvagers, they were unwitting participants in something far larger and more dangerous than he could have imagined. The crystal formation pulsed again, and new passages opened in the chamber walls. Somewhere in the distance, Marcus could hear something approaching, footsteps that echoed with mechanical precision. They weren't alone on Sentinel Island, and whoever else was here had been waiting for them to find this place. The crystalline chamber hummed with an energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. Ancient symbols pulsed along the walls in rhythmic waves of blue-white light, casting dancing shadows across Sarah's face as she worked at what appeared to be a control interface, carved from the same impossible material as the walls themselves. "The entire island is artificial," she whispered, her fingers tracing patterns that responded to her touch with cascading illuminations. Built around this core structure, everything, the storms, the electromagnetic interference, even the hostile wildlife, it's all part of an automated defense system that's been running for millennia. Marcus kept his rifle ready, eyes scanning the chamber's multiple entrances. The silence felt wrong after the chaos above. "Defense against what?" "Against us finding this." Sarah's voice carried a mixture of awe and terror as symbols rearranged themselves before her touch. "Marcus, this isn't just a repository. It's a library, a complete record of a civilization that existed here before the last ice age, before recorded human history began." The chamber shuddered, and new passages of light began racing across the ceiling. Marcus felt a pressure building in his skull, as if something vast and alien was pressing against his consciousness. "Sarah, whatever you're doing, maybe you should stop." "I can't." Her voice sounded distant, dreamy. "It's responding to my neural patterns, learning from me. It knows I'm here to preserve what's inside." A low thrumming filled the air, and Marcus realized the sound wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from beneath them. Deep underground, something massive was awakening. The crystalline surfaces began to resonate, creating harmonics that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his bones. "Sarah!" Marcus grabbed her shoulder, breaking her connection with the interface. She gasped, stumbling backward as the symbols flared blindingly bright before settling into a steady, expectant glow. "They knew," she breathed, her eyes wide with understanding. "Whoever built this place, they knew their time was ending. Climate change, geological catastrophe, something was coming that would wipe them out. So they built this vault, programmed it to wait for the next sapient species to evolve enough to find it." The thrumming grew stronger, and Marcus felt vibrations through the soles of his boots. "And now we have the technology here." Sarah turned back to the interface, her scientific curiosity overriding caution. Energy manipulation, genetic modification, environmental control on a planetary scale. It's all here waiting. The knowledge to solve every crisis we face. Climate change, disease, resource scarcity, everything. Marcus's radio crackled to life, cutting through the chamber's otherworldly ambiance. Chen's voice, tight with panic. "Kane, we've got movement on the surface. Big movement. The whole island's lighting up like a Christmas tree, and something's coming up from underground." Through the chamber's entrances, Marcus could see corridors that hadn't been there before, passages carved from living rock that pulsed with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. The island wasn't just waking up, it was changing, reconfiguring itself around the ancient structure at its core. "We need to go," Marcus said, but Sarah was already back at the interface, her hands moving with increasing confidence across the alien controls. "Just a few more minutes. I can download the basic linguistic matrix, create a translation protocol. Without it, everything here will remain locked away forever." A new sound joined the thrumming, a high-pitched keen that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The hostile creatures above weren't just guarding the island, they were part of its immune system, and that system had detected an intrusion. Marcus's earpiece crackled again. "Kane, the boats, they're moving on their own. Engines won't respond. We're trapped." The chamber's walls began to shift, revealing new interfaces, new displays of impossible technology. But with each revelation, the keen grew louder, more urgent. Whatever automated systems controlled this place, they were caught between two imperatives: preserve the knowledge for humanity's benefit and protect it from those who might misuse it. "Sarah, we're out of time." Marcus could hear something large crashing through the passages above, the island's guardians, drawn by the activation of the central chamber. "Almost there," Sarah muttered, her eyes reflecting the alien script flowing across the displays. "It's incredible, Marcus. Their understanding of consciousness, of life itself. It's not just technology they've preserved. It's philosophy, wisdom, a roadmap for becoming something more than human." The temperature in the chamber began to rise, and Marcus realized the island was making a decision. The thrumming reached a crescendo, and suddenly every surface blazed with light. Information flooded the displays: star charts, genetic sequences, mathematical proofs that hurt to look at directly. Sarah stepped back from the interface, a small device in her hand glowing with the same blue-white radiance as the chamber walls. "I've got it, the key to everything." Above them, the ceiling began to iris open like a vast eye, revealing the storm-lashed sky and something else. Shapes moving against the lightning, too large and too purposeful to be natural. The island had made its choice. Now they had to survive it. The passage descended deeper into the heart of the island than Marcus had imagined possible. The walls bore carved symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light of his headlamp, telling a story older than recorded history. Elena moved beside him with the reverence of someone walking through a cathedral, occasionally stopping to photograph the hieroglyphs with trembling hands. "These aren't from any civilization I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the narrow tunnel. "The mathematical precision, the astronomical references, it's like they were documenting something we haven't even discovered yet." Marcus kept his rifle ready, though he wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever created those massive claw marks they'd seen in the upper chambers. The air grew thicker as they descended, carrying a metallic taste that made his teeth ache. Behind them, he could hear Reeves muttering prayers in what sounded like Latin. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that defied the island's modest surface dimensions. Marcus's headlamp beam disappeared into darkness overhead, unable to find the ceiling. Massive stone pillars arranged in perfect geometric patterns stretched into the void, each one covered in the same writhing symbols that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. But it was the sound that made Marcus's blood run cold, a deep, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. Not mechanical, but organic, alive. "Jesus Christ," Reeves breathed, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "What is this place?" Elena had already moved toward the nearest pillar, her archaeological instincts overriding her fear. "The symbols are evolving," she called back, excitement creeping into her voice. "Look, they're not just carved, they're growing, changing." Marcus joined her at the pillar's base and immediately understood her fascination and terror. The hieroglyphs weren't static stone carvings, but something that resembled living tissue, slowly shifting and reforming as they watched. At the pillar's base, a depression in the stone held what looked like a pool of liquid mercury, its surface reflecting not their faces, but something else entirely. Images of star systems, of worlds spinning through space, of creatures that had never walked on Earth. "The salvage job," Marcus said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. "Yamamoto wasn't sent here for any crashed plane or lost cargo ship. He was sent here for this." Elena nodded grimly. "And whoever hired him has been planning this for a long time. The radiation readings, the government restrictions, they've been using fear to keep people away while they figured out how to access what's down here." The humming grew louder, and Marcus felt it in his bones now, a vibration that seemed to resonate with his very DNA. Around the chamber, more pools of the mercury-like substance began to glow with their own light, revealing the true scope of the space. It wasn't just a chamber. It was a complex, with passages branching off in every direction, all leading deeper into the earth. "We need to get out of here," Reeves said, backing toward the entrance. "This isn't natural. This isn't right." But even as he spoke, the sound of falling stone echoed from the tunnel behind them. Then silence. Then footsteps, too many footsteps, moving with inhuman coordination. Marcus spun toward the entrance, rifle raised, and his headlamp illuminated figures emerging from the tunnel. At first glance, they looked human, but the way they moved, the perfect synchronization of their steps, the fact that their eyes reflected light like an animal's, everything was wrong. "The missing research teams," Elena whispered in horror. "They never left the island." The figures, Marcus counted at least 8, spread out in a semicircle, blocking their retreat. They wore the tattered remains of modern clothing, but their skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality. When one of them spoke, its voice carried the same harmonic resonance as the humming stones. "You should not have come here," it said, though its mouth barely moved. "The awakening is not complete. The preparation is not finished." Marcus kept his rifle trained on the speaker. "What awakening? What the hell happened to you people?" "We were chosen," the figure replied, and now Marcus could see that the same writhing symbols from the pillars were moving beneath its skin like living tattoos. "As you will be chosen, as all will be chosen when the convergence comes." Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. "The astronomical references in the carvings, they're countdown markers. Something's coming, something from space, and this place is designed to receive it." The transformed humans began to advance, moving with that same unsettling coordination. Marcus fired a warning shot that echoed deafeningly in the chamber, but they didn't even flinch. "There is nowhere to run," the speaker said. "The island knows you are here. The island has always been waiting for you." As if responding to its words, the mercury pools began to bubble and rise, and Marcus realized with growing dread that they weren't trapped in an ancient tomb. They were standing in the middle of something that was very much alive and waking up. The bioluminescent trail led them deeper into the island's heart, where the jungle gave way to something that defied explanation. Ancient stone structures emerged from the vegetation like sleeping giants, their surfaces covered in the same pulsing symbols that had adorned the temple walls. But these weren't ruins. They were alive, integrated seamlessly with the organic growth around them. Marcus checked his equipment pack, ensuring the precious data drives were secure. The electromagnetic readings from Dr. Chen's modified scanner had gone haywire the moment they'd crossed into this inner sanctum. Whatever technology lay buried here operated on principles that made their instruments useless. "Kane." Elena's voice cut through the humid air. She stood transfixed before a massive archway where stone and living wood had fused into impossible geometries. The crew logs from the Magellan mentioned structures like these. They thought they were hallucinating from radiation exposure. Sarah emerged from behind a towering formation that might have been a tree or a spire, or both. "The genetic markers I've been tracking are off the charts here. Whatever's influencing the island's ecosystem, this is ground zero." The trail of luminescent spores continued through the archway, beckoning them into a vast chamber beyond. Marcus took point, his weapon ready but feeling increasingly inadequate against forces that seemed to operate outside conventional understanding. The air itself hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. Inside, they found themselves in a cathedral of impossible architecture. Walls curved upward into darkness, their surfaces alive with flowing patterns of light. At the chamber's center stood a structure that hurt to look at directly, a fusion of crystalline formations and organic matter that pulsed with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, then immediately regretted the sound in this sacred space. Elena was already moving toward the central formation, her scientific curiosity overriding caution. "The quantum signatures are incredible. This is processing information at speeds that shouldn't be possible with any known technology." "It's not technology." Sarah's voice carried a note of awe and terror, at least not as we understand it. "This is evolution. Guided, accelerated, purposeful. Something's been orchestrating changes on this island for millennia." Marcus felt the weight of the data drives in his pack. The satellite imagery, the government files, the testimonies of survivors, none of it had prepared them for this. This wasn't just an undiscovered species or hidden military installation. This was something that challenged the very foundations of what it meant to be human. A low vibration filled the air, and the patterns of light on the walls began to shift. The luminescent spores that had guided them here swirled upward, forming complex helical structures that reminded Marcus of DNA strands. But these were moving with intention, rearranging themselves into new configurations. "It's responding to our presence," Elena breathed. "It's trying to communicate." The vibration intensified, and Marcus felt it in his bones. Images flashed through his mind, not his own memories, but something older. He saw the island as it had been thousands of years ago, when the first visitors arrived from across dark waters. Not colonizers, but refugees fleeing some cosmic catastrophe that had consumed their home among distant stars. "You're seeing it too," Sarah said, her eyes wide. "The memories are being transmitted directly into our neural pathways." The visions continued. Marcus watched as the survivors used their advanced understanding of genetics and consciousness to merge with the island's ecosystem, becoming something new, neither fully alien nor terrestrial, but a bridge between worlds. They had hidden here, evolved here, waited here. But the images also showed them why they waited. The cosmic threat that had driven them to Earth still existed, still hunted across the void. And humanity, in its rapid expansion into space, was about to encounter it unprepared. "This is why the island's protected," Elena said, understanding flooding her voice. "They're not just hiding from us, they're preparing us." The central formation pulsed brighter, and new patterns emerged in the flowing lights. Marcus recognized some of them from the temple: star charts, DNA sequences, mathematical formulas that described forces beyond current human science. This was a repository of knowledge, a gift left by refugees who had become Earth's secret guardians. But even as wonder filled him, Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze. The distant sound of rotor blades cutting through jungle air. Their extraction window had closed hours ago, which meant these weren't friends coming to collect them. "Company," he announced, checking his weapons charge. "And given our current location, I'm betting they're not here for the scenery." The luminescent patterns on the walls flickered, as if responding to the approaching threat. The alien hybrid guardians of Sentinel Island had remained hidden for millennia, but Marcus realized their careful isolation was about to end. Whatever forces were converging on this place, the stakes had just escalated far beyond a simple salvage operation. The knowledge they'd discovered could save humanity or destroy it. The question was whether they'd live long enough to decide which. The carved doorway yawned before them, like the mouth of some primordial beast, its obsidian surface drinking in the light from their torches. Marcus ran his fingers along the intricate symbols that spiraled around the frame, each one seeming to pulse with its own inner warmth, despite the cold stone. "These markings," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble that had been growing steadily louder since they'd entered the temple complex. "They're not just decorative, they're instructions." Marcus pulled his hand back as if stung. "Instructions for what?" Before Chen could answer, a blood-curdling howl echoed from somewhere behind them in the labyrinthine corridors they'd just navigated. The sound was immediately followed by the sharp crack of gunfire and Torres's voice bellowing orders. "Move," Marcus commanded, grabbing Chen's arm. "Whatever's in there, it's got to be better than what's coming for us out here." They plunged through the doorway into absolute darkness that seemed to swallow their torchlight whole. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and Marcus felt his breath crystallize in the air. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the chamber they'd entered was impossibly vast. Chen fumbled with her equipment pack and pulled out a high-powered LED array. When the light blazed to life, both of them staggered backward in shock. They stood on a narrow stone bridge that stretched across a chasm so deep their light couldn't find the bottom. But it wasn't the abyss that made Marcus's blood freeze. It was what lined the walls. Thousands of alcoves had been carved into the living rock, each one containing a perfectly preserved human figure. But these weren't quite human anymore. The bodies were tall, elongated, with skin that seemed to shimmer with an opalescent sheen. Their eyes, even in death, reflected the LED light like polished mirrors. "Oh my God," Chen breathed. "They're beautiful." Marcus kept his rifle ready, sweeping the chamber for threats, but he couldn't deny the strange allure of the preserved beings. Beautiful and dead. Let's focus on not joining them. More gunfire erupted from the entrance behind them, closer now. Torres and his remaining men were being driven back. Marcus could hear the islanders' war cries growing louder, more frenzied. There, Chen pointed across the bridge to where their light revealed another doorway, this one glowing with a soft blue radiance. "That's where we need to go." They ran across the narrow span, neither daring to look down into the abyss or up at the watching eyes of the preserved guardians. The blue light grew stronger as they approached, and Marcus felt an odd tingling in his bones, as if every cell in his body was vibrating at a frequency just beyond perception. The second chamber was smaller but no less remarkable. In its center sat a crystalline structure the size of a small building, its faceted surface pulsing with that same blue light. Streams of energy flowed through it like luminous blood through transparent veins. "It's a machine," Marcus realized, though the technology was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Or maybe it's alive. Hell, maybe it's both. Chen approached the crystal with the reverence of a pilgrim entering a sacred shrine. "The isotope readings are off the charts. This thing is putting out more clean energy than a fusion reactor, but there's no radiation signature at all." An explosion rocked the temple, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Torres burst through the far doorway, his uniform torn and bloodied, dragging 2 wounded soldiers. "They've got us surrounded," he gasped. "The whole damn island is converging on this place. Whatever you're looking for, you better find it fast." Marcus studied the crystal, noting the way its light patterns seemed to respond to their presence. "This is what they're protecting. This is what your government really wants." "A power source like this could revolutionize everything," Chen said, her scientific excitement overriding the immediate danger. "Clean energy, space travel, maybe even what killed the original inhabitants." Marcus cut her off, nodding toward the preserved figures they'd seen in the previous chamber. "Ever consider that?" Another explosion, closer this time. The crystal's pulsing accelerated, and Marcus felt that cellular vibration intensify. The walls began to resonate with a low harmonic that he felt more than heard. Torres set up a defensive position at the entrance while his men took cover behind fallen stones. "Whatever we're doing, we need to do it now. I've got maybe 10 minutes of ammunition left." Chen pulled out a handheld scanner and began taking readings from the crystal. "I need more time to understand how it works." "Time's a luxury we don't have," Marcus replied, but even as he spoke, he found himself drawn to the artifact. There was something hypnotic about its pulsing rhythm, something that whispered of secrets older than civilization itself. The war cries of the islanders grew louder, and Marcus realized they weren't just protecting their home. They were protecting the world from something that might be too powerful for humanity to control. The ancient chamber stretched before them like a cathedral carved from living rock, its walls pulsing with veins of bioluminescent coral that cast everything in an ethereal blue-green glow. Marcus felt his breath catch as he took in the impossible sight. Massive crystalline formations jutted from the floor and ceiling, each one humming with barely contained energy that made his teeth ache. "Jesus Christ," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Marcus, do you understand what we're looking at?" He didn't, but the reverent terror in her voice told him it was something that would reshape everything he thought he knew about the world. The symbols covering every surface seemed to move in his peripheral vision, shifting and writhing like living things. At the chamber's heart stood a towering structure that defied description. Part machine, part organism, with tendrils of what looked like metallic coral spreading across the floor in complex patterns. Yuki stepped forward, her eyes wide with recognition. The old stories. They called it the heart of the deep ones. But this... She shook her head, struggling for words. "This is technology beyond anything in the legends." A sound from behind made them all spin around. Captain Torres emerged from the tunnel, his face grim and his rifle raised. Behind him came 3 of his remaining crew members, their weapons trained on Marcus and his companions. "Step away from it," Torres commanded, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Nobody touches anything until we understand what we're dealing with." Marcus kept his hands visible but ready. "Captain, whatever this is, it's been here for thousands of years. A few more minutes won't..." "Won't what?" Torres cut him off. "Won't trigger some ancient doomsday device? Won't alert whatever's been keeping people away from this godforsaken island?" His eyes were wild, desperate. "My men are dead because of this place, Kane. Dead because you convinced me to come here for your salvage job." The central structure pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber filled with a low harmonic vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dr. Chen stumbled backward, pressing her hands to her ears. "It's responding to us," she gasped. "The electromagnetic fields, they're off the charts." Yuki moved toward one of the wall panels, her hand outstretched. "The patterns, I can almost read them. It's like the writing system evolved from something my grandmother showed me, but older, much older." "Don't touch it!" Torres shouted, but Yuki's palm was already pressed against the coral-like surface. The effect was instantaneous. Light raced along the chamber walls in branching patterns, and the central structure began to unfold like a massive flower. Layers of what looked like organic circuitry revealed themselves, pulsing with alien intelligence. The harmonic vibration grew stronger, and Marcus felt it in his bones, in his blood, as if something was trying to communicate directly with his nervous system. Images flashed through his mind, visions of vast underwater cities, beings that moved through the ocean depths with impossible grace, technology that blurred the line between biology and engineering. He saw Earth as it had been millions of years ago, when humanity's ancestors were still learning to use tools and the true masters of the planet dwelt beneath the waves. "They're not gone," he heard himself saying, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud. "They're waiting." Dr. Chen was frantically checking her instruments, her face pale with excitement and terror. "The energy readings are increasing exponentially. Whatever this is, it's powering up. We need to get out of here." But Yuki couldn't pull her hand away from the wall. Tears streamed down her face as the alien consciousness touched hers. "They tried to warn us," she whispered. "The Guardians, the creatures that attack anyone who comes here. They're not protecting this place from us. They're protecting us from waking something that should stay sleeping." Torres took a step forward, his finger tightening on his rifle trigger. "What the hell does that mean?" The answer came in the form of a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to emanate from far below the chamber. The entire structure shuddered, and cracks appeared in the crystalline formations. Through those cracks, Marcus could see movement, something vast stirring in the depths beneath the island. "The signal," Dr. Chen breathed, staring at her instruments in horror. "It's not just local. This pulse is broadcasting on frequencies that will carry across the ocean floor, across all the ocean floors. Marcus felt ice form in his veins as understanding dawned. The salvage job, the mysterious cargo they'd been sent to retrieve, it had all been a setup. Someone had wanted this chamber activated, wanted to send this signal into the depths where ancient things waited in patient slumber. "We're not salvage operators," he said, his voice hollow with realization. "We're the trigger." The chamber's light grew blinding, and somewhere in the crushing depths below, something that had slept since before recorded history began to wake. The ancient chamber stretched before them like a cathedral carved from living rock, its vault ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Marcus kept his weapon ready as they moved deeper into the space, their footsteps echoing off walls covered in the same spiral symbols they'd seen throughout the temple complex. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts," Dr. Chen whispered, her scanner casting an eerie blue glow across her face. "Whatever's generating this field, it's directly ahead." Elena moved beside Marcus, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond their lights. The tribal warriors had stopped at the chamber's entrance, refusing to go further despite their reverence for the place. Their fear spoke volumes about what lay ahead. There, Sarah pointed toward the far end of the chamber where a faint phosphorescent glow emanated from behind a series of towering stone columns. As they approached, the source of the light became visible, a crystalline structure roughly the size of a small building, its faceted surface pulsing with an inner radiance that shifted through colors Marcus had no names for. The air around it shimmered with energy distortions, and he could feel the hair on his arms standing on end. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed, her scientific instruments forgotten as she stared at the impossible sight. "It's not just generating electromagnetic fields, it's creating localized gravitational anomalies. The physics alone..." Marcus felt a familiar chill of recognition. The crystal's pulsing rhythm matched something he'd experienced before during his darkest missions. "This isn't the first time I've seen something like this." Elena turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, black site operation in the Hindu Kush. We were sent to investigate unusual seismic activity, found a cave system with similar crystalline formations much smaller. Marcus's jaw tightened at the memory. The government sealed it with thermite charges. Told us it never happened. Sarah moved closer to the crystal, seemingly drawn by its hypnotic glow. "The patterns in the stone, they're not random. They're mathematical, like a 3-dimensional equation made manifest." "Don't get too close," Dr. Chen warned, her scanner detecting dangerous energy spikes. "The field strength is increasing as we approach. Prolonged exposure could be..." She never finished the sentence. The crystal's glow suddenly intensified, bathing the entire chamber in brilliant light. Marcus instinctively raised his weapon, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "Look." The light wasn't just illuminating the chamber, it was revealing hidden elements within the rock itself. Symbols appeared along the walls, glowing as if lit from within, creating a complex map or diagram that surrounded the crystal like the spokes of an enormous wheel. "It's a star chart," Sarah realized, her archaeological training allowing her to decipher the ancient notation. "But not of our solar system. These constellations, they're completely alien." Marcus felt the weight of understanding settling over him like a shroud. The salvage operation, the government contracts, the secrecy around this place. We were never meant to find this accidentally. Elena nodded grimly. Someone's been planning this for a long time. The question is whether they want to study it or destroy it. A new sound echoed through the chamber, the distant thrumming of helicopter rotors, multiple aircraft approaching fast. Marcus cursed under his breath as he recognized the tactical formation, military sweep pattern. "They've found us." Dr. Chen was frantically taking readings, trying to gather as much data as possible before they were forced to leave. "The energy signature is unlike anything in our physics models. If this technology could be understood, reverse engineered, it could revolutionize everything," Sarah finished. Energy production, space travel, our understanding of the universe itself. Or it could be weaponized, Marcus added darkly, his military experience providing a grimmer perspective. Imagine this kind of power in the wrong hands. The helicopter sounds were getting closer, accompanied now by the distant shouts of advancing troops. The tribal warriors at the chamber entrance began backing away, their loyalty to Elena outweighed by their ancestral fear of the outside world's military forces. "We need to move," Elena said urgently. "There are other passages, ways out they won't know about." But Marcus was studying the crystal with growing concern. Its pulsing had accelerated, and the energy distortions around it were becoming more pronounced. "I don't think we're the ones triggering this response." Dr. Chen's scanner suddenly erupted in warning beeps. "The field is destabilizing. Whatever's causing the fluctuations, it's building towards some kind of cascade reaction." Sarah grabbed her research notes, her face pale with realization. The legends speak of the island's guardians awakening when threatened. What if the crystal isn't just a power source? What if it's a defense system? The chamber began to vibrate, a deep harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate in their bones. Dust fell from the ancient ceiling as the very foundations of the temple complex responded to the crystal's increasing agitation. Marcus made a command decision. "Everyone out now. Whatever this thing is preparing to do, we don't want to be here when it happens." As they ran toward the chamber's exit, the crystal's light reached blinding intensity, and the last thing Marcus saw was the star chart on the walls beginning to move, the alien constellations shifting into new configurations like a cosmic combination lock, finally finding its proper sequence. The ancient chamber trembled as Marcus pressed his palm against the crystalline surface of the artifact. Energy coursed through his body like liquid lightning, and suddenly his mind exploded with visions that weren't his own. He saw the island as it once was, a thriving civilization where beings of impossible beauty and intelligence walked among structures that defied physics. They weren't quite human, these ancients, their eyes holding depths of knowledge that made him feel like a child staring at the stars. The artifact wasn't just a relic, it was a repository of their entire accumulated wisdom, their technology, their understanding of forces that humanity had yet to discover. "Marcus," Elena's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Marcus, you need to let go." But he couldn't. The visions pulled him deeper. He watched as catastrophe struck, not from within but from the stars. Something dark and hungry approached Earth, and the ancients knew they couldn't survive its coming. So they made a choice. They encoded themselves into the crystal matrix, becoming one with their greatest creation, waiting for a species worthy of their legacy to find them. The Sentinelese weren't just guardians, they were the descendants of those who had chosen to remain flesh and blood, tasked with protecting the island until the time was right. For thousands of years, they had kept their vigil, knowing that one day someone would come who could unlock what their ancestors had left behind. Marcus felt consciousness returning like surfacing from deep water. Elena was shaking him, her face pale with concern. The artifact had gone dark, but something fundamental had changed. He could feel it in his bones, knowledge that hadn't been there before, understanding that stretched beyond human comprehension. "What did you see?" Elena whispered. Before Marcus could answer, the chamber filled with a low harmonic vibration. The walls began to glow with the same blue light as the artifact, and suddenly they weren't alone. Translucent figures materialized around them, the ancients or some echo of them preserved within the crystal matrix. One stepped forward, its features shifting like water, but somehow conveying profound sadness and hope in equal measure. When it spoke, the words bypassed Marcus's ears entirely, appearing directly in his mind. "You have awakened us from our long dream. But awakening brings responsibility. What you have seen, what you now carry, it changes everything. Your species stands at a crossroads, the same crossroads we once faced." Marcus found his voice. "The threat you saw, is it still coming?" "It never stopped coming. We merely delayed it. But in you, in your people, we see possibility we did not have. You are young, adaptable. You fight when we sought only to hide." Elena stepped closer, her scientific mind racing. "The technology, the knowledge, you're offering to share it?" "Not offering, entrusting. But know this, such power comes with a price. Your world will never be the same. Some will use this knowledge to heal and build. Others will seek to dominate and destroy. The choice of how to proceed rests with you." The chamber shuddered again, and Marcus realized the vibrations weren't just from the awakening technology, they were coming from above. Heavy footsteps, machinery, voices shouting orders. Blackwater had found the entrance. "They're here," he said grimly. The ancient entity's form flickered with what might have been urgency. "The guardians above fight to protect what they have always protected. But they cannot hold such numbers for long. You must choose quickly, take what you can and flee, or stand and ensure this power doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Marcus felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. Everything he'd learned, everything he now understood about the artifact's true nature, it couldn't be allowed to become just another weapon in Blackwater's arsenal. But how could two people stand against Hartwell's entire operation? Elena was studying the chamber walls, her expression intense. "Marcus, look at this." She pointed to a series of crystalline nodes embedded in the stone. "These aren't just decorative, they're part of some kind of network. If the artifact is the key, these might be defense systems," Marcus finished, understanding flooding through him. The knowledge the ancients had shared wasn't just academic, it was practical. He knew somehow how to activate the island's dormant protections. "Yes," the entity confirmed. "We built this place as both sanctuary and fortress, but the defenses require a living will to guide them. Are you prepared for that burden?" The sounds from above grew louder. Explosions now and screams. The Sentinelese were dying to protect secrets they didn't even fully understand, trusting in a promise made by ancestors lost to time. Marcus looked at Elena, seeing his own resolve reflected in her eyes. They had come here seeking salvage, but they had found something infinitely more valuable and more dangerous. The responsibility was terrifying, but the alternative was unthinkable. "Tell me what I need to do," he said to the ancient presence. The entity's form began to fade, but its final words rang with absolute clarity. "Trust in what you have become. The island will respond to your will now. Use it wisely." Marcus reached for the nearest crystalline node, feeling power flow through him like nothing he'd ever experienced. Marcus's boots splashed through knee-deep water as the ancient chamber began flooding around them. The crystalline formations that had pulsed with ethereal light moments before now flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows on the carved walls. Dr. Chen clutched the obsidian artifact against her chest, her face pale in the dying luminescence. "The whole structure is destabilizing," she gasped, stumbling as another tremor shook the island. "Taking the heart has triggered some kind of fail-safe." Marcus grabbed her arm, steadying her as chunks of stone crashed into the rising water behind them. "Then we get out of here, now." They pushed through the flooded passage, the water level climbing with each step. Marcus could hear the groaning of ancient stone, the sound of a civilization's final breath after millennia of patient waiting. The tunnel ahead split into 3 directions, each disappearing into darkness. "Which way?" Marcus demanded, his tactical light sweeping across the options. Chen's eyes were unfocused, distant. Since touching the heart, she'd been different, as if something vast and alien was speaking to her in whispers only she could hear. "Left," she said finally. "It leads to the surface." They plunged into the leftmost tunnel just as the chamber behind them collapsed entirely. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. Water rushed after them in a torrential wave. Marcus wrapped his arm around Chen's waist and ran, half carrying her through the narrow passage. His lungs burned and his wounded shoulder screamed in protest, but he pushed forward. Behind them, the island was devouring itself. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Marcus felt a flutter of hope until he saw the obstruction ahead. A massive stone door blocked their path, covered in the same intricate symbols they'd seen throughout the complex. Unlike the others, This one showed no signs of mechanism or weakness. "There has to be a way through," Marcus said, running his hands along the edges. The water was at their waists now, still rising. Chen stepped forward, the heart pulsing brighter in her grip. She pressed her free hand against the door's center, where the symbols formed a complex mandala pattern. The artifact resonated, sending waves of blue-white energy through the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door simply dissolved. Not opened, not moved aside. It became mist and shadow, allowing them to pass through into a vast cavern beyond. Moonlight streamed down from an opening far above, and Marcus realized they were directly beneath the island's central peak. "Incredible," Chen breathed, but her wonder was cut short by another violent tremor. Stalactites began raining down around them like spears. Marcus spotted a series of carved handholds leading up the cavern wall toward the opening. "Can you climb? Do I have a choice?" They began their ascent as the island continued its death throes below. With each handhold, Marcus felt the weight of their discovery pressing down on him. The heart wasn't just an artifact, it was a key, a piece of technology so advanced it made human achievements look like finger paintings, and now they were carrying it away from its guardians, away from the island that had protected it for thousands of years. Halfway up, Chen's strength gave out. She hung from the rock face, gasping, the heart's weight threatening to pull her down. Marcus climbed alongside her, close enough that she could lean against him. "I can't," she whispered. "It's too heavy. Not the artifact, the knowledge." "I can see it all, Marcus. What they were, what they built, what they were running from. Save the revelations for when we're not about to die," Marcus grunted, boosting her up to the next handhold. "Move." The opening above them grew larger, and Marcus could smell salt air mixed with smoke. When they finally hauled themselves up and out, they emerged onto a ledge overlooking the island's northern shore. The sight below stopped them cold. Sentinel Island was sinking. The ancient structures were collapsing into themselves, and the ocean was rushing in to fill the voids. What had stood for millennia as an impregnable fortress was becoming nothing more than foam and rubble. The tribal settlements along the shoreline were already underwater. "My God," Chen whispered. "We've killed it. We've killed the island." Marcus pulled out his satellite phone, praying for a signal. 2 bars, barely enough. He keyed in the emergency frequency he'd given Torres before their expedition began. "This is Kane. We need immediate extraction at the northern peak. The island is going down." Torres's voice crackled through the static. "Copy that. Bird is inbound, ETA 6 minutes. What's your status?" Marcus looked at Chen, who sat holding the heart like a mother cradling a dangerous child. Her eyes reflected its pulsing light, and he knew she would never be the same. None of them would. "Package secured," he said into the phone. "But we're not the only ones who know about it anymore." In the distance, he could see lights on the horizon, ships moving toward their position with purpose and speed. Marcus could feel the island's pulse beneath his feet as he descended deeper into the crystalline cavern. The walls around him hummed with an energy that seemed to resonate in his bones, and the air itself felt charged with possibilities. Behind him, Dr. Sarah Chen's breathing was sharp with excitement, her scientific mind racing to process what they'd discovered. The passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file. Ancient symbols carved into the crystal walls began to glow brighter as they approached, as if responding to their presence. Marcus had seen enough unexplained phenomena in his military career to know when something was beyond ordinary comprehension, but this felt different, older, more profound. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down here, it's generating more power than a nuclear reactor." They emerged into a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move independently of their flashlight beams. But it was the structure in the center that made him freeze in place. A massive crystalline formation rose from the chamber floor like a frozen waterfall, its faceted surface pulsing with internal light. Within its translucent depths, Marcus could make out shapes, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if his mind couldn't quite process their dimensions. "By God," Sarah breathed, stepping forward despite Marcus's restraining hand. "It's a repository, a data storage system beyond anything we've ever conceived." The crystal responded to her approach, its glow intensifying. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and Marcus felt a presence touch his mind, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. Images flooded his consciousness, star maps showing routes between worlds, technological blueprints for devices that defied physics, genetic sequences that could rewrite the human genome. He staggered backward, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon before he realized the futility of the gesture. This wasn't something that could be fought with bullets. "It's trying to communicate," Sarah said, her voice dreamy and distant. She had moved closer to the crystal, her hand extended toward its surface. "I can feel it reaching out, trying to share what it knows." "Sarah, don't!" Marcus lunged forward, but it was too late. Her palm pressed against the crystal's surface. The chamber exploded with light. Sarah's body went rigid as energy coursed through her, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. The crystal's pulse quickened, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat, and Marcus could hear her mind screaming, not in pain, but in overwhelming comprehension. Knowledge poured into her consciousness, the true history of humanity, their origins among the stars, the genetic modifications that had been made to their species eons ago by visitors from beyond. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations that had mastered faster than light travel, witnessed the careful seeding of worlds with life designed to eventually reach back toward the stars. Marcus grabbed her shoulders, trying to pull her away from the crystal, but the connection held fast. Through their contact, fragments of the vision leaked into his mind. He saw Earth as it truly was, not humanity's birthworld, but one of many garden planets, carefully tended nurseries designed to cultivate intelligence and consciousness across the galaxy. The Sentinels weren't guardians protecting the world from intruders. They were caretakers, ensuring that humanity developed naturally until they were ready to reclaim their cosmic heritage. The island itself was a beacon, a test site designed to identify individuals capable of handling the truth. Above them, Marcus could hear the sound of helicopters approaching. Draven had found them, bringing with him the full weight of corporate and military power. They had minutes, perhaps less, before the chamber would be swarming with soldiers intent on claiming this discovery for themselves. Sarah's connection to the crystal suddenly severed, and she collapsed into Marcus's arms. Her eyes, when they opened, held depths that hadn't been there before, the weight of cosmic knowledge that no human mind was meant to contain. "We can't let them have it," she gasped, struggling to stand. "They'll weaponize it. Use it to control rather than enlighten. This knowledge, it's meant to free humanity, not enslave it." The sound of explosives echoed from above as Draven's team blasted their way through the cave-ins Marcus had created. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the chamber would be breached. Marcus looked at the crystal repository, then at Sarah's transformed expression. Everything he'd believed about humanity's place in the universe had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of moments. The choice before them was clear. Let this discovery fall into the hands of those who would exploit it, or find a way to ensure it reached the world on humanity's terms. Sarah met his gaze and nodded, understanding passing between them without words. She placed both hands against the crystal's surface and began the download sequence that would change everything. The first soldiers appeared at the chamber entrance, just as the crystal began to sing. The ancient chamber trembled as Marcus pressed his palm against the crystalline core, feeling the pulse of millennia-old energy coursing through his body. The Sentinel Guardians had fallen silent, their luminous forms flickering like dying stars around the perimeter of the vast underground sanctum. "Marcus, the readings are off the charts." Sarah's voice crackled through his comm, distant and distorted by the electromagnetic interference. "Whatever you're doing down there, it's affecting the entire island." He could feel it too, the awakening. The knowledge that had slumbered beneath Sentinel Island for thousands of years was finally stirring, ancient memories flooding his consciousness like a dam bursting. Images cascaded through his mind, civilizations that had risen and fallen, technologies that defied modern understanding, and the terrible responsibility that came with such power. The crystalline network spread throughout the chamber began to resonate, each node lighting up in sequence like synapses firing in a cosmic brain. Marcus understood now why the Sentinels had guarded this place so fiercely, why ships had vanished in these waters, why the island itself seemed to repel intruders. This wasn't just a repository of ancient knowledge, it was a test. "Kane!" Reeves' voice cut through the subsonic hum filling the chamber. The corporate operative had somehow followed him down, his tactical gear torn and bloodied from navigating the island's defenses. "Step away from that thing. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Marcus turned slowly, his hand still connected to the core. Through the neural link, he could sense Reeves' desperation, the weight of corporate interests and military contracts that had driven him to this moment. "I know exactly what this is," Marcus said, his voice carrying new harmonics. "The question is whether humanity is ready for it." The chamber shuddered again, and Marcus felt the island's defensive systems beginning to recalibrate. The Sentinels hadn't been trying to kill the intruders. They'd been testing them, evaluating their worthiness to inherit the legacy hidden beneath their sacred ground. Most had failed that test, their greed or fear marking them as unfit guardians of such power. The salvage operation was a cover, Marcus continued, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "Your employers knew what was down here. They've been trying to access this place for decades." Reeves raised his weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. "Doesn't matter what I know. What matters is securing the asset and getting it back to people who can use it properly." The core pulsed brighter, and Marcus felt the full weight of the decision before him. The technology here could solve humanity's greatest challenges: energy crises, environmental collapse, even the vast distances between stars. But it could just as easily become the ultimate weapon, capable of reshaping matter at the atomic level. Through the crystalline network, he sensed Sarah and the others fighting their way through the collapsing tunnels above, racing against time as the island's awakening triggered seismic activity that threatened to tear the entire landmass apart. The Sentinel's ancient programming was clear. If the Guardians deemed humanity unworthy, the knowledge would be sealed away forever, taking the island and everyone on it down into the depths. "You want to know the real irony?" Marcus said, feeling the power building within the core. This technology was left here by the last civilization that destroyed itself trying to use it. They built the Sentinels not as guardians but as witnesses, waiting for the next species to evolve enough to face the same choice they did. Reeves fired, but the energy discharge from the core deflected the bullets harmlessly aside. The chamber was now fully alive, ancient machinery humming with purpose as it prepared for either integration or annihilation. Marcus closed his eyes and made his choice. Instead of trying to download or extract the knowledge, he began uploading something else, the sum total of human experience he'd witnessed in his years of conflict and redemption, the love he'd seen Sarah show for her work and her team, the courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, the capacity for growth that had brought him from a broken soldier to someone capable of making this decision. The core accepted the offering, processing millennia of human struggle and achievement in nanoseconds. When the analysis was complete, the chamber fell silent. The Sentinels materialized one final time, their forms now radiant with approval rather than warning. They bowed their heads in acknowledgement before dissolving into particles of light that flowed upward through the stone, carrying with them the seed of the ancient knowledge, not as raw power to be exploited, but as wisdom to be earned gradually over generations. Marcus felt the connection break as the core went dormant, its energy spent. The chamber began to collapse around them, but now he could hear Sarah's voice clearly through the comm, guiding them toward an escape route that hadn't existed moments before. As they raced through tunnels that the island itself was carving for them, Marcus understood that Sentinel Island would sink back beneath the waves, as it had done many times before. But humanity had passed its test, earning not the power to reshape the world overnight, but something far more valuable, the promise that when they were truly ready, the knowledge would return. The real treasure had never been gold or artifacts. It had been the chance to prove they deserved to inherit the stars.